Hello plant friends, it's Alanya here and welcome to my tiny balcony here in suburban Sydney where I'm learning to grow cold, cool and intermediate orchids without the help of grow lights, greenhouses, misters etc. It's just me, my orchids and Mother Nature out there. If you're new here, welcome and thank you for finding me and pressing play, and if you've been here before, welcome back, it's lovely to have you. So this week I thought I'd talk about a plant that I got approached at work about. I get approached at work a lot, and it is a phalaenopsis, and oh my goodness, is it gruesome. And I happen to have it here, and this is it. Now, on first look, it doesn't look too bad. It's got good leaves, it's rather floppy in its pot. In fact, it's completely out of its pot. And it's got one dying leaf, which is fine. But when I lifted it out of the pot, after 14 years, it still has its original plug. So she asked me to take it away and see if I could work some magic with it. So I brought it home and it reeks. So as I mentioned, it's been in this pot for 14 years and it has never been out of this pot. It's in a clear, oh, and no wonder it's rotten. I've just lifted the whole thing out and oh God, it's dripping. So I don't know how. Oh, okay, just off camera, I've taken it out of its plastic pot. Unfortunately, I don't have another pot to put it into, so I'm going to have to go and clean this so that I can sterilise it and put it back into its pot. But I think what I might do is, before I even wash it, is I've got some 3% hydrogen peroxide here, and I'm just going to spray that around in the pot just to kill anything that might be in there before I take this into my laundry and wash it out. And I might even, while I'm doing this, I know I still haven't taken anything off yet, but that's okay. Okay, I'm back and I have washed it out with bleach. It is stained, there's nothing I can do about that. The pot's still in good condition, so I'm just going to reuse this with its decorative pot, which I've also cleaned out. So the plant itself has got a lot of dead roots, and I've got my snips, which I think I need to sterilise myself after this. I'm just going to sit down and do this in front of you here. So I've got some, on my table I've got a few things and I'll pull them into frame as I need them. Okay, so the first thing I've got is I've got the plant. It still has its original plug, so the first thing I am going to do is I'm just going to cut that off. The whole thing is just rotten, so gone. Now looking at these other roots, they're starting to soften up. This one here is completely squishy, so I'll take that one all the way back. There's another one that's just popped right off. And I'm just going to go through and take off the dead roots, of which there are quite a lot. This green one here, while it's a little floppy at the top, it's still attached, it's still green, and it still has a bit of a growing tip, so I'm going to leave that. Any root that's got green on it, I'm going to leave in place. Now I've got this yellow leaf. Now, it'll come off on its own, so I'm just going to take that off as well. So we can see that there is a decaying tip, so we're going to take that off. And it's still brown at the bottom there, so that's quite dead. Okay. Alright, and I'm also going to take off any hard nubby bits that will just make it awkward for the plant to grow. Alright, that looks a lot cleaner and a lot healthier. Okay, so on my table I have some cinnamon. Now I am going to use the cinnamon, let me just get rid of this. Ugh. It smells so bad. I'm going to have to sanitize my table after this too. And this is why I've got cardboard down. Okay, so I might even just isopropyl alcohol. Alright, so on my table I have some cinnamon. So I'll put some cinnamon on the countertop and I'm just going to dip careful not to get it on the roots, but I'm just going to dip that base hard into the cinnamon. So I've dipped that into the cinnamon really well, and I'm going to wipe off the rest of the cinnamon to anything else. And now I'm just going to set that upside down on the top here for a couple of days. It'll be fine to dry. So I will see you in a couple of days, but for you it will be next. It's a couple of days since I unpotted the repot phalaenopsis here. When I got this plant, the pot and the container, the plastic container, was rotten from the top down. And in this case, the baby plug was still in place, and it was foul enough that the actual stench made me want to retch. So what I wanted to talk about in this particular video is why we might replant our plants and not leave them in the nursery pots that they come in. When these plants are purchased at the florist, at the hardware store, at a surface station, or as we're in Australia here, a servo. Sometimes gift stores have them. I've seen them at the airport coming through, hospital, florist shops, and any other place that might have phalaenopsis for sale. Now these things are mass produced, tend to be clones of something called Mary clones, which are a tissue culture. So sometimes these plants are really not in the best condition to start with and are just force grown. This one, however, I don't know where this came from. I don't know what colour the flower is. I know nothing about this plant other than it was in pretty bad shape with a bright yellow leaf when I got it. So why do we want to repot our plants within a year or so, even weeks, or when the flowers have finished? Often these plants are terribly neglected. Phalaenopsis tend to be the gateway orchid, and there is a popular misconception that they like a lot of water or they like to be dry, and not a lot in between. But realistically, they like water, they like a little bit of damp, but they don't like having sodden feet. Often they're in a sphagnum moss, which is really a temporary measure for 6 to 12 months. And if you do have them in sphagnum moss and you want to keep them in sphagnum moss, you do need to repot those fairly frequently, maybe 12 to 18 months. Matthew from Hello Plant Lovers has a couple of phalaenopsis that he keeps exclusively in a glass vessel with sphagnum moss, and I will link that video below to see what he does for his, and I think it might be a beautiful white one that he keeps in his sphagnum moss. But I can't do that here in Sydney, it is way too humid for that. I choose to put my phalaenopsis into a standard bark mix. Now this is a mix of my own making, and it is 50% bark, 20% perlite, 20% carbon, and 10% sphagnum moss for some moisture retention. The perlite is for moisture retention, and the bark is an antimicrobial, which will help with any smell. Now when I use it, I do hydrate it first. So I have sprayed this with water with a bit of sea salt in it, and this has been here for about 15 minutes, and it's now ready for me to use. Now, new potting mix, it's fresh, it's light, it's airy, and I know what is in it, and I know the health of this. The other reason to repot your orchids is so that you can inspect the roots. So when I inspected the roots for this one, there was a very long central root, and it still had its nursery plug that when it was a seedling, that plug was still here after 15 years. Now the reason why this one is in this water is while it had good leaves, it was a little bit dehydrated because the roots were in such poor condition, and the roots that we see hanging in the water here were actually all aerial, but when I took the thing out of the pot, it all just dropped down. These are going to become buried roots. It also allowed me to check the growing tips of the roots. The roots here are actually fairly decent. I did cut a couple of the mouldy roots off, the growing tips that had broken, and I did actually put a little bit of cinnamon on those for a few hours before I popped it in the water, and that's just to seal off those tips. So I was able to check the base of the root just here, and that base was completely rotten, so I was able to cut that off, cinnamon that up, allow that to dry, and it's just been sitting in the cleaned out nursery pot with its tips and water for 24 hours now. I'm just going to pot this up per any other Phalaenopsis. It is going back to its owner in its original, I don't even know where I've put the, here we go, it's actually holding my tools. So it's going to go back in its original plastic pot and its decorative pot. Okay, let's change the perspective and have a look at how I am going to once again pot this Phalaenopsis.
Because I've done so many repotting videos for Phalaenopsis, I'm going to speed this one up and just briefly talk through what I'm doing here. I'm going to give my mix a bit of a shake, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a few grains of StrikeBack for orchids in this case. I'm taking the original plastic pot which I've cleaned out with bleach, and I am now going to use this one to put the orchid back into this pot. It doesn't have any air holes around the side, but I did go ahead later on and punch a few holes using an awl to improve and increase the airflow to the pot. Add 1 to 2 scoops of the mix so that you can test the plant for the height, and add or subtract mix as necessary. I'm also going to add a few grains of slow release fertiliser in addition to the StrikeBack for orchids. This is not strictly necessary, but it's habit for me. I'm now going to add a small dab of mycorrhizal fungi. Orchids and mycorrhizal fungi have a symbiotic relationship, and the mycorrhizal fungi breaks down the planting media and produces nutrients for the plant, and the plant gives the mycorrhizal fungi energy. Just a small dab is enough. It's at this point I realised I forgot to set the height of the planting media for the plant. So I've got the plant and I've just corkscrewed it down into the pot and prompted those roots to go down into the planting media, or where I'm going to set the planting media to. I now start backfilling the planting media in and around the newly buried roots, and I tamp and tap the planting media into place to remove any excess gaps that may harbour bacteria in the planting media, and I keep doing that until the planting media is at the same level that the old planting media used to be at. I remembered that I needed to add a bamboo skewer to the pot so that hopefully when the plant flowers again, there will be a stick and a clip ready for the flower spike to be anchored to. I then continue to add the planting media to hold that stake and plant in place. When all the planting media is in place and tamped down, I go ahead and give the whole plant a good soaking with a sea salt or seaweed solution in water at approximately 1 part sea salt to 16 parts water dilution to help the plant's roots settle into their new home. You can see here that the water in the jar is black. That's okay, that is just the dust coming off of the charcoal in the mix. When the water stopped draining, we can go ahead and put the plastic pot back into the decorative pot. I did end up putting a layer of gravel in the bottom of the decorative pot so that we can easily lift the plastic pot out so we can check the roots for when the plant may need to be watered again. Finally, because this plant has not had any fertilising or nutrients, I've gone ahead and given it a bit of a spray with a calcium acetate foliar spray to help the overall strength and health of the plant.
Well, plant friends, as I was editing this video, I didn't realise I hadn't filmed an outro. So I had already brought the orchid to work. So I thought, oh, I'll quickly do this while it's actually in its home at work. So thank you for watching, and If you would like to see what I'm doing next week, please do press the subscribe button below with the notifications turned on so that you can be notified every time I upload. And I have no idea what I'm doing next week, but I have a feeling it's going to be something to do about pots and what you can use if you are on a tight budget for pots that might be suitable for orchids. So until then, thanks for watching, and hope you enjoy our little friend here. This is his new home. See you all next week. Bye. This is one other orchid in the same space that I am currently looking after, and also a little variegated monstera that was drowning and is now doing very well. So I'm looking after orchids at work.